My name is Victoria Sinclair. I'm 72 years old. 3 weeks ago, the concierge I'd known for nearly 15 years looked at me with genuine embarrassment and quietly said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sinclair, your access has been revoked." I smiled, not because I thought he was joking, because I had personally approved the security system he was standing beside. "I believe there's been a mistake," I said. He looked down at his tablet. "There isn't." He hesitated before adding, "Your son instructed management not to let you inside." The words didn't hurt immediately. Shock has a strange way of delaying pain. Instead, I glanced toward the glass entrance of the penthouse tower where I'd lived for almost 2 decades. On the 46th floor, the lights in my apartment were on. Someone was walking past the windows. Someone who wasn't me. The concierge lowered his voice. "They said you've been confused lately." Confused. That word again. So carefully chosen. So difficult to challenge without sounding defensive. I thanked him for his honesty. Turned around. Walked back toward my car. And as I reached the sidewalk, I looked up at the building one more time. Most people saw luxury. Glass. Steel. $1 million views of Biscayne Bay. I saw something entirely different. I saw every structural beam. Every emergency stairwell. Every hidden service corridor. Because 23 years earlier, I had designed half of that building. My son had locked me out of the wrong place. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you've ever learned that betrayal can wear an expensive suit and still come from your own family, you'll understand how this story began. I live in Brickell, Miami. Or at least, I did. People who visit Brickell notice the yachts, the restaurants, the polished marble lobbies, the towers that reflect the sunrise like mirrors. Architects notice different things. We notice proportions, light, lines, how buildings breathe. Most people think architecture is about drawing beautiful buildings. It isn't. It's about solving problems before anyone else realizes they exist. That's what I spent 41 years doing. Luxury hotels, corporate headquarters, museums, private residences. By the time I retired, more than 60 buildings across Florida carried my signature somewhere inside their blueprints. Not literally. Architects don't sign concrete. We leave pieces of ourselves in every decision. Every staircase, every window, every wall people never think about. I never married another architect. My late husband, Daniel, was a structural engineer. People joked that our dinner conversations sounded like construction meetings. Maybe they did. But we built more than buildings. We built a family. After Daniel died 8 years ago, everyone expected me to leave the penthouse. It was too large. Too expensive. Too quiet. Instead, I stayed. Not because I couldn't move on. Because every sunrise over Biscayne Bay reminded me of the life we'd created together. Some memories deserve an address. My son Ethan had always been ambitious. As a child, he built elaborate cities out of wooden blocks. As an adult, he became one of Miami's most successful luxury real estate brokers. He understood expensive property. He understood wealthy clients. What he never understood was why I cared more about integrity than profit. "Mom," he'd say, "nobody remembers who designed a building. They remember who owns it." I'd always answer the same way. "They remember both." He'd smile politely. The conversation would end there. Or so I thought. About 6 months before everything happened, Ethan began visiting more often. At first, I welcomed it. He brought dinner, asked about my health, insisted on fixing things that weren't broken. He even started calling every evening. "You take your medication today?" "Yes." "Are you sure?" "I've been taking the same prescription for 9 years." He laughed. "I just worry." It sounded caring. Maybe even sweet. Until he started repeating the same questions. Had I missed appointments? Forgotten names? Lost my keys? Driven somewhere and forgotten why? The questions never came all at once. They arrived one at a time, scattered across weeks, like someone quietly assembling a puzzle. I didn't think much of it. At least, not then. My granddaughter Sophie visited every Sunday afternoon. She was 23, recently graduated with a master's degree in urban planning. Unlike Ethan, she genuinely loved architecture. She'd spend hours looking through my old sketchbooks. "Grandma," she once asked, "do you ever miss designing buildings?" I smiled. Every day. Then why retire? Because good architects know when to stop drawing. She nodded thoughtfully. "You still notice everything, don't you?" "I try." She laughed. "No." She looked around the apartment. "You don't try. You can't stop." She wasn't wrong. Even after retirement, I noticed loose hinges in restaurants, uneven flooring in hotel lobbies, improper drainage around sidewalks. Observation had become permanent. One Sunday, while Sophie helped water the plants on my terrace, she suddenly became unusually quiet. "What is it?" I asked. She hesitated. "Dad asked me something." "Ethan." She nodded. "He wanted to know if you've started forgetting conversations." I looked at her carefully. "What did you tell him?" "The truth." "And what is that?" "That your memory is better than mine." I smiled. She didn't. He also asked if you've ever gotten lost driving. The watering can suddenly felt heavier in my hand. "No." He asked whether you've started repeating stories. I looked toward the skyline. Glass towers shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. "Some of them I'd helped create." "Did he say why?" Sophie slowly shook her head. "No." Then she looked directly at me. "But Grandma." "Yes." It didn't sound like he was asking. It sounded like. She searched for the right words. He already wanted the answer. A cool breeze drifted across the terrace. For reasons I couldn't explain, it suddenly felt much colder than Miami ever should. I watched a construction crane slowly rotate in the distance. After 40 years in architecture, I'd learned one lesson. Buildings never collapse without warning. The warning signs appear long before anyone notices them. The real danger is recognizing them too late. For the next several days, I couldn't stop thinking about Sophie's words. It didn't sound like he was asking. She was right. Ethan wasn't gathering information. He was confirming something. Or trying to. That difference mattered. When you've spent 40 years reviewing architectural plans, you learn one simple truth. Nothing significant appears on paper by accident. Every line has a purpose. Every measurement leads somewhere. People aren't much different. Questions are blueprints. Eventually, they reveal what someone is trying to build. The following Tuesday, Ethan called unusually early. "Morning, Mom. You're up before the stock market." He laughed. "I wanted to check on you. I'm standing on my balcony drinking coffee." "By yourself?" The question caught my attention. "Yes." A pause. "Have you been going out much?" "Enough." "You know." His voice softened. "You don't have to drive everywhere anymore." "I enjoy driving. I just worry." There it was again. Not concern. The performance of concern. "I've never had an accident." "I know." "I've never gotten lost." "I know." "So what exactly worries you?" Silence. Long enough for me to hear him exhale. "I just don't want anything to happen." Neither did I. The difference was, I wasn't sure we were talking about the same thing. That afternoon, someone knocked on my door. A young technician stood outside, carrying a toolbox. "Mrs. Sinclair." "Yes." "I'm here to replace your smart lock." I frowned. I didn't request a new lock. He checked his tablet. "It says your son approved the work yesterday." My son doesn't own this apartment. The technician looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry. There must be some misunderstanding. There is. I smiled politely. But it isn't mine. He apologized several times before leaving. As the elevator doors closed behind him, I stopped smiling. Someone had just attempted to replace the security system protecting my home, without speaking to me. An hour later, I called building management. The property manager sounded genuinely confused. We were told you'd already approved everything. Who told you that? Your son. And you believed him. A long pause. He said he was helping because. She hesitated. Because what? Because you had been forgetting things lately. I thanked her, ended the call, then walked slowly toward the living room windows. 46 floors below, Miami moved exactly as it always had. Luxury cars, business meetings, construction cranes, people rushing through lives that appeared perfectly organized. Appearances. I knew better than most how deceptive they could be. Beautiful buildings sometimes hide dangerous foundations. Beautiful families can do the same. That Sunday, Sophie arrived carrying takeout from my favorite Italian restaurant. She immediately noticed something was wrong. What happened? I told her about the technician. She didn't interrupt. Didn't even look surprised. That bothered me more than anything else. You expected this. She looked down at her coffee. Dad asked me another question. What was it this time? He wanted to know whether you'd ever talked about selling the penthouse. I stared at her. I've never once discussed selling it. I know. He also asked whether you still kept the original blueprints. Now I stopped breathing for just a second. Very few people knew those blueprints still existed. Daniel and I had preserved complete construction sets from every major project we'd worked on together. Not for money. For history. Architecture is temporary. Paper remembers longer than concrete. Why would he ask that? Sophie slowly shook her head. I don't know. But I could see she was lying. Not to protect herself. To protect someone else. That night, I opened the fireproof cabinet in my study. Inside were dozens of carefully labeled archival tubes. Hotels. Museums. Office towers. Private residences. At the very back, Brickell Tower residences. Original construction drawings. I carefully removed the tube, placed it on my drafting table, unrolled the first sheet. Even after 23 years, every line looked familiar. The lobby, mechanical systems, electrical rooms, emergency access corridors, the private service elevator almost no resident knew existed. I smiled. Buildings never forget the people who design them. The next morning my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Ethan. It was the concierge. His voice sounded nervous. Mrs. Sinclair. Yes. I wasn't sure whether I should call. You made the right choice. There have been several people asking questions about your apartment. What kind of questions? They wanted to know whether you'd been moving valuables. No. Whether anyone else had keys. No. And. He hesitated. They asked if you'd been staying somewhere else recently. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Someone wasn't preparing to help me. Someone was preparing to explain my absence. I thanked him, hung up, then walked back to the drafting table. The original blueprints still lay open beneath the morning sunlight. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking at them as an architect. I was looking at them as evidence. And I had the unmistakable feeling. Someone was planning to remove me from the building I had helped bring into existence. I spent the next week doing something I hadn't done in years. I started keeping an investigation journal. Not because I expected a crime. Because facts disappear faster than memories. Every conversation. Every phone call. Every unexpected visit. Every unusual request. Time. Date. Exact wording. 41 years of architecture had taught me that every successful project begins with accurate documentation. The same was true for uncovering deception. 3 days later, another surprise arrived. A courier delivered an oversized envelope. The return address belonged to a well-known Miami interior design firm. I had never hired them. Inside was a proposal for a complete renovation of my penthouse. New flooring, custom cabinetry, demolition permits, furniture removal. Estimated completion: 8 weeks. Estimated cost: $480,000. The final page contained a handwritten note. Looking forward to transforming your new space. Thank you for trusting us. My name appeared beneath it. Typed. Not signed. Interesting. Someone had already begun making plans for my home. Without ever speaking to me. I called the company immediately. A cheerful receptionist answered. Good afternoon. This is Victoria Sinclair. A short pause. Mrs. Sinclair. You've been expecting my call. Actually, she hesitated. We thought your son handled everything. My son, Mr. Sinclair, has met with our design team twice. I remained silent. Silence is remarkably effective. People often rush to fill it. He explained that you're downsizing. I am. Into a luxury, assisted living residence. My fingers tightened around the phone. I'm afraid you've been given incorrect information. The receptionist became noticeably nervous. I'm very sorry. So am I. That evening Sophie stopped by. She looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes. You haven't been sleeping. She forced a smile. Neither have you. She sat across from me. I need to tell you something. I waited. Dad asked me to tour retirement communities. The room suddenly felt much smaller. He wanted my opinion. About what? About which one you'd like. I've never discussed moving. I know. He already has brochures. Brochures. Floor plans. Pricing. Waiting lists. This wasn't an idea. It was a project already underway. Sophie reached into her backpack. I took pictures. She handed me her phone. Luxury retirement residences. Private villas. Spa facilities. Ocean views. Fine dining. Everything looked beautiful. Everything except the handwritten notes in Ethan's handwriting. Closest to hospital. Best memory care reputation. Move before year end. My heart skipped once. Memory care. He wasn't planning retirement. He was planning incapacity. Grandma. Sophie's voice trembled. I don't think this is about the apartment anymore. Neither did I. The following morning, I called my oldest friend, Harold Bennett. We'd worked together on skyscrapers for almost 30 years. He'd supervised construction on Brickell Tower from the first concrete pour until the ribbon-cutting ceremony. If anyone understood that building as well as I did, it was Harold. He arrived an hour later carrying 2 coffees. You sounded serious. I am. I told him everything. From Ethan's questions to the renovation proposal. He listened quietly. When I finished, he stared toward Biscayne Bay. Victoria. What? Do you remember the owner access corridors? I smiled faintly. Every inch. Good. He leaned forward. Because management probably doesn't. Harold unrolled the original blueprints across my dining table. Together we studied them like 2 surgeons reviewing an X-ray. Mechanical rooms. Emergency systems. Private maintenance corridors. Then Harold tapped one section. There. A narrow hallway hidden behind the service elevators. Invisible to residents. Accessible only with engineering credentials. Hardly anyone knew it existed. Even fewer remembered why. It was added after Hurricane Andrew. Harold nodded. Exactly. I looked at the drawing. Then back at him. If someone changed the electronic lock system, they'd never think about the original mechanical override. A slow smile crossed my face. They wouldn't even know it exists. That afternoon, I drove past the tower instead of entering. Construction trucks stood outside. Workers carried materials into the lobby. That was unusual. No renovation permits had been posted. No resident notices. Nothing. Harold frowned. They're moving quickly. They think they have time. He looked at me. And do they? I don't know. But something bothered me. Professional developers don't begin expensive renovations without complete legal authorization. Unless they believe ownership is already settled. The answer arrived sooner than either of us expected. The next morning, my concierge called again. This time, he sounded frightened. Mrs. Sinclair. What happened? There was a meeting yesterday. What kind of meeting? Building management. Go on. Your son introduced himself as the future owner of your residence. The words hung in the silence between us. He said the transfer was almost complete. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not suspicion. Not preparation. Expectation. Ethan genuinely believed the penthouse would soon belong to him. He wasn't hoping. He was planning renovations, hiring designers, scheduling contractors, explaining my disappearance before it even happened. He had already begun living in a future where I no longer had a place. The only problem was that future had been designed by the wrong architect. Because there was one part of Biscayne Tower no developer, no property manager, and certainly not my son, knew still existed. And inside that forgotten space was something that could destroy everything he had planned. I didn't tell Ethan that I knew. I didn't accuse him. I didn't confront him. People imagine deception ends with a dramatic argument. It rarely does. It ends when one side realizes the other has been quietly collecting facts the entire time. I wasn't there yet. Harold and I returned to Biscayne Tower early the following morning. Not through the front entrance. Through the underground service garage. Most residents had no idea it even existed. Architects always design access routes the public never notices. Electricians need them. Plumbers need them. Engineers need them. Buildings have private lives, just like families. Harold still carried his original engineering credentials. Technically, they had expired years ago. Practically, no one had ever removed his access from the building's archive records. The security gate buzzed open. We stepped inside. The mechanical corridors smelled exactly the way I remembered. Concrete, steel, machine oil, cold air humming through ventilation shafts. 23 years disappeared in an instant. It felt like walking through an old memory. We reached the original engineering control room. The room had been converted into storage years earlier. Boxes lined the walls. Old blueprints, maintenance logs, inspection reports, everything the management company considered obsolete. I smiled. People throw away history because they think digital records are enough. They rarely are. Harold pulled an old metal cabinet toward us. You remember. I remember installing it. Inside were dozens of archival binders. Every construction revision. Every permit amendment. Every engineering approval. Every emergency override protocol. Then I saw it. A thick red binder labeled Final Ownership and Structural Modifications. I slowly opened it. The first several pages were familiar. Then, one document made me stop. It was the original legal agreement between the developer and the architectural firm. My firm. Most architects receive only design fees. This project had been different. The developer had nearly gone bankrupt halfway through construction. Unable to pay our final contract. He'd negotiated something else. A permanent architectural covenant. I'd almost forgotten about it. Harold hadn't. He quietly smiled. I wondered how long it would take you. I read every line carefully. The covenant required written approval from the original lead architect before any structural alteration affecting designated architectural elements could legally begin. Not the homeowners association. Not the management company. Not even future owners. The architect. Me. Until my death. I looked at Harold. They can't renovate. He nodded. They can't even move one interior wall. Suddenly, the expensive design firm, the contractors, the renovation proposal. Everything stopped making sense. Unless Ethan had never told them the truth. Harold pointed toward another section. There, attached behind the covenant, was every structural revision ever approved, including one detail almost no one remembered. The penthouse safe room. People imagine safe rooms as hidden bunkers. This wasn't that. It was a reinforced archival vault. Fireproof. Floodproof. Hurricane-rated. Built into the structural core. Daniel had insisted we include one after Hurricane Andrew. Originally, it stored architectural records. Later, it became our family archive. Original deeds. Legal contracts. Insurance documents. Daniel's journals. Construction agreements. Every document too important to trust anywhere else. Very few people knew it existed. Including Ethan. That afternoon, I called Benjamin Ross, the attorney who had handled every legal matter for Daniel and me for nearly 30 years. After hearing everything, he asked only one question. Have you checked the vault recently? No. Then don't wait. Harold accompanied me back that evening. The hidden vault remained exactly where we'd left it years ago. The combination still worked. Heavy steel bolts unlocked with a satisfying mechanical click. Inside, everything appeared untouched. Shelves of archival boxes. Labeled binders. Original drawings. Then I noticed something strange. One shelf contained a small gap. Barely noticeable. Unless you knew every box by memory. I did. Something's missing. Harold looked over. What? The blue box. What was inside? I didn't answer immediately. Because I already knew. Original ownership documents. Including the handwritten amendment Daniel and I had signed 22 years earlier. The amendment Ethan had never seen. The amendment that changed everything. My pulse remained perfectly calm. Years of construction meetings had taught me one invaluable lesson. Never panic until you understand what actually disappeared. I checked the inventory log. Every document stored in the vault had been cataloged, including removal dates. Only, no removal had ever been recorded. Someone had entered the vault. Someone who shouldn't even have known it existed. Then Harold noticed something on the concrete floor. A faint scratch. Fresh. Not made by moving boxes. Made by a rolling document case. Someone hadn't searched randomly. They'd come looking for one specific file, which meant they already knew approximately where it was. I slowly closed the vault door. Ethan didn't find what he wanted. Harold frowned. How can you be sure? Because if he had. I looked around the silent room. He would have stopped. The next morning, Ethan called. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. Mom. Good morning. I was thinking. I'm sure you were. I found a beautiful retirement community overlooking the ocean. I smiled. I've always preferred penthouses. He laughed. I just want you somewhere you'll be safe. I'm perfectly safe. Another pause. Then he quietly asked, You still have all your old paperwork? There it was. Not my health. Not my memory. Paperwork. I answered carefully. Why do you ask? Oh. His tone became casual. I figured most of it had probably been thrown away. I looked toward the fireproof cabinet across the room. No. I've kept everything. Silence. Only this time. The silence came from his side. He hadn't expected that answer. After we hung up, my phone vibrated again. It was Sophie. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Grandma. What happened? I think Dad knows someone helped you. Why? I walked into his office this morning. And he was furious. She swallowed hard. He kept saying, "Who got into the building?" I closed my eyes. So, he knew someone had discovered part of his plan. But he still didn't know which part. That gave me exactly one advantage. Time. And in every building I'd ever designed, time was the one force capable of exposing even the smallest structural flaw. The same, I suspected, was true for Ethan's plan. I had one advantage Ethan didn't know about. He believed this was a fight over property. It wasn't. It was a fight over documentation. And documentation had always been my strongest language. Benjamin arrived at my apartment the following morning, carrying a slim leather briefcase. He spread every document we'd collected across my dining table. The renovation proposal. The emails from building management. The concierge's written statement. The architectural covenant. Photographs of the hidden archive. Sophie's notes. Everything. He looked at me. There's still one question. What is it? What does Ethan actually believe he's missing? I thought for a long moment. Then my eyes drifted toward Daniel's old drafting desk. The answer had been sitting there for years. He thinks the deed makes him the owner. Benjamin nodded. And he doesn't know about the second agreement. 22 years earlier, after Brickell Tower had opened, Daniel and I had quietly created a family trust. Not because we expected conflict. Because we'd spent our lives watching wealthy families destroy themselves over property. The penthouse wasn't owned by me. Not directly. It belonged to the Sinclair Architectural Preservation Trust. The trust contained one unusual condition. The residence could never be sold or transferred without unanimous approval from all three trustees. Daniel, Benjamin, me. After Daniel passed away, Benjamin and I became the remaining trustees. Ethan had inherited many things. The penthouse wasn't one of them. He'd spent months trying to take something that legally couldn't be transferred in the first place. Benjamin smiled for the first time all week. He never requested the trust documents because he didn't know they existed. Exactly. Sometimes intelligence creates its own blind spots. Ethan assumed he'd found every important file. He never imagined the most important document had never been kept inside the apartment. 2 days later, the building association announced its annual owners' reception. Nearly every resident attended. Developers, attorneys, business owners, investors, the management board. Perfect. Because Ethan planned to make an announcement there. Sophie warned me the night before. He wants everyone to believe you're retiring. How do you know? I heard him practicing. The ballroom overlooked Biscayne Bay. Crystal chandeliers reflected against the glass walls. Soft piano music filled the room. Champagne flowed freely. Everything looked elegant. Exactly the kind of place where ugly truths felt especially uncomfortable. I arrived quietly with Benjamin and Harold. Several residents greeted me warmly. Others looked confused. Apparently, rumors travel faster than elevators. Half an hour later, Ethan stepped onto the small presentation stage. He thanked everyone for coming. Spoke about community improvements, future renovations. Then smiled. My mother has decided it's finally time for a new chapter. Several guests applauded politely. I didn't move. He continued. She's chosen to enjoy retirement in a beautiful assisted living community, and I'll be overseeing the renovation of her residence before its next phase. That was enough. Benjamin nodded toward me. It was time. I walked slowly toward the stage. The room fell silent. Ethan's smile faded. Mom. I looked at him calmly. You forgot one detail. He tried to laugh. What detail? I placed a single blue folder on the podium. The building. Confused faces filled the room. I opened the folder. 23 years ago, I designed this tower. A few residents nodded. Most already knew. What many of you don't know. I lifted the architectural covenant. Is that no structural renovation can legally begin without my written approval. The property manager's face turned white. Harold handed him a certified copy. He began reading immediately. Ethan interrupted. That doesn't change ownership. No. I agreed. It doesn't. Benjamin stepped beside me. But this does. He placed the trust agreement on the podium. Silence. Absolute silence. Benjamin spoke clearly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. The penthouse has never been owned by Ethan Sinclair. He turned another page. It isn't even owned directly by Mrs. Sinclair. Every eye in the room followed the document. The residence belongs to the Sinclair Architectural Preservation Trust. Someone in the audience whispered, "A trust." Benjamin nodded. Which means every statement regarding an ownership transfer. He looked directly at Ethan. It was false. The property manager slowly lowered the papers. You told us the transfer was nearly complete. Ethan said nothing. The interior designer, standing near the back of the room, suddenly recognized the renovation proposal. So that's why we never received trustee authorization. One realization triggered another. The contractor, the association president, the concierge. Each person quietly understood they'd been working from information that simply wasn't true. No shouting. No courtroom drama. Just reality arriving one document at a time. Then Sophie stood. No one expected that. She walked beside me holding a small flash drive. I think everyone should see something else. She connected it to the ballroom projector. Emails appeared on the screen. Calendar reminders. Renovation schedules. Retirement home visits. Lists titled, Prepare Mother for Transition. Discuss memory concerns with management. Coordinate access changes. The room became completely still. One final email appeared. It had been sent by Ethan to the renovation company weeks earlier. Once she's permanently moved out, begin demolition immediately. No one spoke. There was nothing left to explain. Ethan looked at his daughter. You went through my files. Sophie answered quietly. I went looking for the truth. For several seconds, Ethan simply stood there. Then something unexpected happened. He stopped pretending. I wasn't trying to hurt you. He looked at me. I was trying to save everything. The market collapsed. My biggest client backed out. I was going to lose everything. I thought. His voice cracked. I thought if I could refinance the penthouse for a few months. There it was. The real reason. Debt. Not greed. Desperation wearing expensive clothes. I walked toward my son until only a few feet separated us. When you were 12, I said quietly, you asked me why architects always overbuild foundations. He looked down. I remember. I told you buildings don't fail because of one heavy day. He nodded faintly. They fail after years of tiny cracks no one repairs. I looked around the silent ballroom. This wasn't about one bad financial decision. It was about every small lie that followed. 6 months later, Ethan lost his real estate license. Civil lawsuits followed from the companies he'd misled. No criminal charges were filed. He cooperated fully and repaid what he could. Sophie accepted a position with one of Miami's leading urban planning firms. Harold finally retired for good. Benjamin remained exactly as he'd always been. Calm. Prepared. Impossible to surprise. As for me, I still wake before sunrise. I still drink coffee overlooking Biscayne Bay. Every morning, the first light reflects from the glass towers across the water. Some of those buildings exist because I imagined them decades ago. People often believe the greatest legacy is the property you leave behind. They're wrong. It's the principles you refuse to compromise. Buildings can last a century. Integrity has to survive every single day. If this story made you think about how easily trust can be tested by money, family, or ambition, I'd genuinely like to know what you would have done in my place.